So I'm so excited to have Lara Lewington, my good friend, here to join us today to talk about her new book, Hacking Humanity. Lara, welcome to the Business of AI podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, and it's strange that I'm getting to interview you because normally you're interviewing other people and
I
I'm
know.
watching you interview other people. So to turn the tables a little bit today.
Indeed, it's slightly unnerving, but I do often sit in this seat as well, and I guess I've got plenty to say.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have the luxury of knowing Lara outside of work. We talk about so many other things. We talked about Pomeranians and Dubai chocolate.
You're gorgeous Pomeranian.
I know, it's one of the things that I think I should have brought him along today, actually. That would have been like a bit of a thing, but he would have been very distracted, I think, if we'd have had Panda.
Totally. I'd have been completely distracted. I wouldn't have told you anything about AI or health. I'd have been playing with the dog.
Yeah, exactly. So next time, I think maybe that's a whole show in its own right, isn't it? Kind of like pandas, pandemonium, they'll sort of like dog show.
Pandemonium, maybe. When your dog's called Panda, yeah, that's perfect.
I think it's one could be. So getting back to the book, we've got a number of things that I'd love to ask you about this book. But first of all, I wondered whether, it's a quick plug for your new book here, which is which is Hacking Humanity. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in this space? I mean, because I've known you for quite a long time, and over that time we've actually already talked about this space. But where did you get started in? What was the thing that attracted you to health and technology in the first place?
Well, I've been covering technology for the best part of 2 decades, and just over 15 years ago, I started working on Click for the BBC, where I was for 15 years. And I saw some of the most amazing innovation on Earth. I mean, I really travelled the world and learnt so much, but the stories that really stood out to me were the ones that were about human health. And I went to see what was going on beneath beautiful ocean surfaces. I'd seen future food. I'd seen so many incredible things that were changing the world, what was happening in sustainability. But these health stories were just the thing that really stuck with me, because I could see the power of what technology and AI, long before it was trendy, could really have on the changes in health and what we could do to make ourselves healthier for longer.
And that's one of the things that I really like as I was reading through the book. Well, two things. One, your personality shines through. So it's like having you there guiding us through with your enthusiasm and your excitement about all those different companies you're meeting. But I think also the human stories, there's quite a few of them in there where you actually sort of bring to life the people you met along the way, whether they be the patients or the scientists and what inspired them. Could you maybe sort of share some of the most powerful stories that people you've met along the way?
Absolutely. And I think what is crucial to this story of future health is that it is a really human story. And the fact technology and AI are driving it is merely the mechanism. This is about people. This is about us. Right now, in England, 20% of a man's life on average is spent in poor health. For women, that's 25%. We have a problem. We live in a wealthy country with a national healthcare service, and that is still the data. So we have a problem that really needs fixing. Now, how can we do this? Well, technology is the driver for it. And the book tells the story of a lot of that technology that can take us there. But also, I wanted to tell it in human terms. You can explain how AI works, and it's quite dry and quite hard to digest. So when it comes to the human story and the impact it can have, I think it's a lot easier to absorb. And so the people I've interviewed for the book have been a real mixture of scientists and doctors, because I think it's really important that you can understand what's going on in the lab, but at the same time, you talk to a doctor to really know what that means on the ground and how plausible it is. So there was that side, but then also the people who are trying to do this. I've interviewed Brian Johnson. I don't know if everybody knows who he is, but the guy spending millions trying to reverse his biological age. He is by no means an example of what I expect everybody to be doing, but he was somebody who brought some programs I made to life, and each individual thing he's doing is rooted in science. So he was a bit of a character in the book. Also, I've got a 103-year-old Mildred, who sadly I found out last week had passed away. But Mildred's story was really interesting because the big question here is, when is living? What do we want out of life? Well, we want to increase our health spans. We want to feel 40 at 60. We don't want to live longer feeling 80. And so the target here is to be not just in great health, but to also have everything else in our lives surrounding us to feel good. And I think Mildred was a real illustration of how you can be 103 with no disease. So she was effectively healthy, but she'd lost her daughter 30 years before. Her son was bedbound. She was terrified every time that she stood up that she was going to fall over. And for her, this wasn't living. She said she'd had enough. She'd led an amazing life. She was a doctor. She'd set up hospitals in Africa. But she just felt that her quality of life was pointless at this time. She didn't recommend living to that age. So even this idea of, well, we want to increase health span, we want to live all of our life as healthily as we can, well, there's still a point at which our bodies seem to start giving up on us. So she was an interesting human story and a contrast to Brian Johnson. To really try and understand what it is we're aiming for here. And then when we understand the target, we can look at how AI and technology can help take us there.
That's great. I love that because, one of the things we say a lot about AI is that it starts with the human, and you're doing exactly that. You're actually sort of highlighting those stories of those human lives that have been changed by technology rather than trying to start with the technology first. And that sort of idea about sort of the health span as well. I mean, that's quite a powerful concept, really, isn't it? Because it's one thing to live longer, but if people are going to be in chronic pain and they're going to have all these problems, that means they actually can't use their body properly. That's going to be really problematic. Brilliant. So in terms of the human angle, I think that's really important to look at. And some of the stories you told there about the scientists who were inspired by people in their own family who'd had these challenges, and then they go on to actually try and find cures for cancer or whatever the diseases were. But a lot of this is rooted in data. And you start, the first part of the book is all about data, which again, I think for a lot of our audience looking at this, they'll come from that data science background. But I wanted to sort of understand how you came up with the decision to start with data, and then how you link it to what we've just been talking about, the human side of it as well.
Yes, well, data is the driver for this. Obviously, data has been critical to healthcare forever. So the idea of data isn't new, but what we can do with it now, what AI gives us the power to learn from it, is of course ever evolving. And we are at a point of dramatic change, and that is only going to accelerate. So data is critical here. And I suppose in writing this book, I needed to start at a point that most people would understand. And the idea of tracking ourselves is something quite simple and mainstream that people could understand what it was, see how in the future we're going to be able to learn even more from those patterns, because patterns are critical to this, because when we see changes in our patterns, it could indicate something's wrong. It doesn't always, but it can be a signal that we should pay attention and do further tests. So this idea of data and what we understand about ourselves is a good start, but I also thought it was really important to be able to leave people feeling empowered as to what they could do to help themselves, whilst not putting too much onus on them, as well as how healthcare systems can shift. Because I think there are two sides to this. Part of it is what we can do for ourselves and helping to motivate us, and how technology can be a driver for that. Because no matter how amazing the scientists were I spoke to anywhere in the world, every conversation came back to the power of lifestyle. And what technology does and what data does is allows us to better analyse what we're doing, not just track it, but see how any changes we make to our lifestyle impact that. And so we can see what's working and what's not in ways that we couldn't in the past.
It's that's the concept of gentle nudges, isn't it? Being able to see the data, and then you can start to kind of make some changes. You talked about it not being about being competitive with another person, but actually it's more about yourself being able to understand your behaviour, and then sort of being able to sort of make some changes day on day as well.
Totally. And this took me back to something that I did about a decade ago, where I tested 4 of the leading brands of activity trackers. And back then, the data between them varied hugely. There was a 25% difference in how far one thought I'd walked than another. One thought that I burnt 3,000 more calories in a week than another, because I was wearing them all for the week. And the one that thought I burnt all the calories wasn't the one that thought I'd done all the walking. A little bit all over the place. And I spoke to who was the then CEO of Fitbit, and he said to me, well, at least they're consistently inaccurate, so you can measure yourself against yourself week on week. And I have to tell you that everyone at the time I saw who was wearing an activity tracker agreed it had changed their life. Anyone who wasn't wearing one said, well, they're not accurate, I don't want to. But in more recent experiments, that gap has totally closed. The differences were negligible. And I think that the level of detail and accuracy with them is certainly enough to indicate pretty important and sensible patterns. Some experts argue the sleep isn't quite good enough in phasing it. Some of the devices are better than others. I actually found in one experiment where I tested the Aura and the Whoop together, they had exactly the same number of minutes of REM sleep. So, that's pretty remarkable, because you look at a sleep clinic and what you have to wear in a sleep clinic with all of these wires coming out your head everywhere. Well, compare that to this on the finger, and obviously even being able to get, say, 75% of the way is pretty impressive.
Yeah. You talk about some of those fantastic places you've been, those sleep labs, the different scans you've had. I wanted to ask you, what was the weirdest place you found yourself in doing something of research for this book?
I've done so many terribly weird things. One was probably walking around a 3D version of my brain wearing a Microsoft HoloLens. And I was walking around in this circle in a room, just looking at, it looked like a tree with loads of sprouts coming out of it, because it was showing you the veins. I think it was very strange. And I was just walking around this room thinking, I'm not sure I even understand or I'm learning anything from this, but it was quite funky. It was part of a really high-end scan. But I think when it comes to these scans, there's a really interesting concept here in preventative and predictive health, but it also raises some questions over the worried world doing it, over treatment. What do we do when people find things wrong? Because that could put an enormous strain on healthcare systems. So I just think we need to approach with caution who tests what, when, and to what ends. So the technology exists, but we also need to be sensible about it. And that's one of the reasons why I felt like I wanted to tell this story, as to how useful each thing is now, how useful things might become, at what point you need to go with the grain of the healthcare system you're in. For example, with genome sequencing, that's the view of the experts, and that seems sensible right now, even though any of us could be doing it for a couple of £100. And just knowing what's sensible and what's useful.
Yeah. So I wanted to explore the genome part of the book as well, because you cover that in quite a bit of detail as well. You start with the tracking data, and then you talk about genetics, and then you sort of start to explore this concept, which I found absolutely fascinating, about personalization, both the sort of personalization of how the different genetic backgrounds affect an individual's health outcomes, but also then things like personalized medicines and personalized treatment. Could you maybe sort of expand a little bit on how you sort of started to, what sort of trends you saw within that space?
Yes, well, AI is giving us the enormous power to be able to bring together details of disease, genetics, lifestyle, adding in all of these factors to understand more about risk initially, so that we can better predict what screening would be needed for who, when. Hopefully, that would lead to the prevention of some illness. Now, not all illness can be prevented, and not all illness will be predicted. So people are still going to get sick. Let's be realistic here. There is this ideal about how we approach prevention rather than just treatment, how we turn sick care to healthcare. But people are still going to get sick, of course. So when they do, the fact that we're understanding more about the triggers for disease, the risk of recurrence for cancers, say, the long-term trajectory these diseases are going to take, means that we can treat them in better ways. Now, at the same time, as we learn more about genetics, we learn more about the microbiome, we're going to understand what treatments are going to have what impact on who, and also the side effects. So some drugs that could be considered too dangerous because they are unsafe for a small percentage of people, we would understand who those people are. So drugs that have great power to be useful to other people where they are safe could actually become available where they otherwise wouldn't be. So we're going to be able to, in the far longer term, and this isn't going to happen overnight, and I think with a lot of this story I'm telling, this is a direction of travel. It's not immediate, but we are going to understand the specific impact for specific disease on specific people. And once we do that, things can be treated more kindly, with fewer side effects, and it can increase health span.
And that's the really interesting role that AI and AI-powered tools, data science effectively, can play in that, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember sort of reading in one of the chapters there where you're saying all of these things come together. So we have the data, we have the understanding of the genome, we're trying to sort of create personalized plans, but actually it's only really been in the last couple of years that we've had the ability for machine learning tools to be able to pull it all together, to spot the signal in the noise and then be able to develop that further.
Yes, exactly. And this is something that no human could ever do. You couldn't pull together these huge data sets. You couldn't unearth these findings. So we've now got the ability to be able to do that. But it needs to be good data. The data needs to be fit for purpose. And a lot of the data being looked at right now will be from legacy systems, will not be collected in a uniform way. So it's absolutely crucial that we have the right data. And when you talk to many of the companies doing amazing work out there, they will talk about it being their data set. They'll talk about how the data was collected, because this is absolutely crucial. We are at the beginning here. We're at the beginning of understanding what's possible, how we can collect the best data and where that can take us. And so there's an incredibly optimistic future ahead, but we also need to be patient and sensible with it.
One of the risks within data collection is sometimes around the biases that are built in just because the people hadn't thought about it. And I think we're getting to the stage now where people have thought about it and they're trying to kind of correct those. You've talked about a few of the examples where female patients are inadvertently suffering the consequences of that biased data. Do you think we are, who do you think's responsibility it is to try and fix that data going forward?
Well, I think the first issue is that we are currently reinforcing some of the biases of humans. And we need the right data sets that are fit for purpose for the people who are going to be benefiting from the data and its findings. So when it comes to health, we know that different ethnicities have different risks. And we also know that over the years, there's not been enough research done on women, even though sometimes some of the conditions are more prevalent in women, but still the data has been very male heavy. So there is huge awareness that this is a problem, has historically been a problem, and is continuing to be so. It is something, though, that there is greater awareness now of correcting. And I think it's a conversation, a really important conversation that's being had a lot. So moving forward, you would hope things will improve and we don't keep on reinforcing the same errors. And
there were some really sort of bad examples there of where the data has been collected for a male population. And I think I read that they didn't collect it for women because they thought that some of the levels of estrogen would distort the data. So it's kind of actually kind of like a very simple mistake. Are those being fixed? Are you seeing those?
Well, that's one of the issues that has been raised, that because women's bodies fluctuate, it's harder to do. But women are over half the population. So we've got to be able to cater for them as well. We can't think, oh, no, they're a bit of a problem because they fluctuate, so we'll ignore them because obviously that's not going to work all round. So maybe moving forward, we need to actually be looking at the impact of drugs on men and women and see how that may vary as well. So the ability to use enormous amounts of data in new ways means we can answer all those questions as well. And as time goes on, we'll understand more about the risks within different ethnicities and make sure we're understanding that. But of course, sometimes the information that humans are giving isn't perfect. They may be ticking a box on a form which isn't quite the right ethnicity. And if that's then going into the data, well, actually, that may skew things as well. So we have to make sure that we are providing the right data, the right information, that those pesky humans don't mess up along the way. And I think longer term, there's enormous promise, but we've seen the problems so far, and hopefully in time that will iron out.
Yeah. Well, within the book, you do a fantastic job, thank you, of being able to champion the role that AI can play in kind of changing healthcare. But whose responsibility more broadly do you think it is to be able to adopt some of those changes and to be able to get it into healthcare, get it into the sort of the hospitals, get it into the hands of clinicians? Are you seeing enough engagement and adoption?
This is where I think things become so complicated, not through a lack of goodwill or good intention, but it's hard. There have been a lot of really successful trials in the NHS that haven't led to rollouts throughout Britain. And that's the reality of this. There's only a certain amount of money. There are not brand new computer systems everywhere. There are a lot of things that can stand in the way of knowing what the answer for the greater good is and being able to do it. When it comes to prevention versus treatment, they're very often different pots of money. And that's even in the UK within a national healthcare system. You look at the US, where if insurers were going to start to offer people any form of prevention, well, it wouldn't make any sense to them because people change insurance company, so they wouldn't benefit from someone not getting sick further down the line. So there are real challenges here throughout the world, different challenges in how this works. It's not to say that it won't, but it's going to be complicated. And so often we're seeing amazing stories in the headlines about what AI is making possible, about the transformation that can come. But it's not going to happen overnight. These are highly regulated situations. And I don't doubt that eventually we will get there. We will be doing the right things, but it's challenging.
You mentioned the US, and obviously they've got a very different healthcare system over there. A lot of the references were to US universities as well, who are doing fantastic research in all different fields. Do you think that they have an advantage over the UK? And is there something that UK can do, should be doing to catch up?
It's a really difficult question, I think, UK versus US on what is an advantage. It's a highly commercial system. an advantage? Well, I don't know. I know a lot of US companies who have broken through to trials in the NHS. That's been their aim, and they have been absolutely over the moon to be able to do that, albeit everything I said about the long-term rollouts. There are different challenges in different places. It's hard everywhere. It's hard everywhere to do something. When it comes to data, the data needs to be safe. Obviously, there's two sort of sides to data here as well, where you've got the power of anonymized data, and that helping people understand how giving access to their data can be amazing for the greater good. But then there's also this side of people's personal data. Well, if they want to have all of their healthcare records in one place, accessible in lots of different ways, that does become their own data, and they need to feel confident about how secure that is. The NHS app is, of course, lots of conversation over that right now. Naturally, that's going to have all the security it needs at its core. We hope, we're sure it does.
Yeah.
So there are different challenges in different places. There are different feelings about who gets access to what data. One bit of research showed how much happier people are about giving their data to the NHS than they are to tech companies. And I think that's not just a matter of trust with the data, but they also want to know who's benefiting from their data.
Interesting, yeah. And I mean, there's so many examples that you've shared here of people who have given their data. And I think you said something like, you're happy for your data to be used by anyone.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've given my DNA away to all sorts of tech companies. I've just decided I'm a human experiment, and I'm fine with that. But I can also understand people's reservations to some extent. I think it's important that the public understands, and this is where the transparency becomes so crucial, understands what their data is being used for, how safely it's being kept. They need to understand all of the restrictions that sit around medical data, and to feel confident about what they're handing over, to what end, and how they will hopefully benefit, and so will others.
Amazing. So just in terms of the future then, I want to sort of think about, what do you think the future looks like in the next year? Because that's quite a long time in kind of like AI and in tech at the moment. What are the things that you're seeing emerging now within the healthcare sector?
A year is a long time. It's also a short time for this direction of travel, because a lot of the things that I've talked about here in this book, a lot of the things we've just covered, they are about direction of travel. They're about reaching a place where we can do something which is absolutely spectacularly different to what we can do now. We will see elements of that emerge. Gradually, there will be incremental change. We will see small improvements, which will hopefully transform health span a little as we move along. But longer term, this is a huge transformation coming. So I think the specifics of what we'll see in a year are quite hard to pinpoint, but there certainly is longer term an absolute direction of travel.
You tell great stories, and I think in the book there are some awesome stories of all of your travels where you've been all around the world and met some incredible people, both the scientists and the patients as well. I think that's the key thing here, which is, there's AI and tech more broadly does a bad job sometimes of telling those stories, being able to sort of help people relate to them. But you're doing a great job here. What's coming next? Is there going to be a new book on the horizon? Now you finished this one, are you thinking about what's coming next?
Various things in the pipeline, TV, radio, all sorts of things. But I want to continue telling this story, because this, I think, is just the beginning.
Amazing. Well, this is the book, so Hacking Humanity, and I really enjoyed reading through it. As I say, I think you've just told such a great story, and a lot of you comes through in this as well. It's got a very infectious, your sort of charisma that comes through all the way. So
That's very kind.
I really do kind of recommend reading it. I'm going to give it another read as well, go through it again. But Lara, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us here today on the Business of AI podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much.